The morning that changed my life started with me carrying 2 coffees I wasn't even going to drink. One was mine, the other was for a project manager who had a habit of dumping rush work on my desk and then acting like she was doing me a favor by trusting me with it. I was 26, 3 years into the company, and useful in the least glamorous way possible. If something was urgent, messy, or beneath everyone else's dignity, it usually found its way to me. I got into the elevator on 32 with my laptop bag cutting into my shoulder and a printed packet under my arm. The doors were almost closed when a hand stopped them. Natalie Prescott stepped in. She was senior executive. Always put together like she had her own lighting team following her around. The kind of woman who made vice presidents stand up straighter when she walked into a room. I'd seen her in meetings from the back wall, never close enough to matter. She gave me one quick glance, the kind people give furniture just to make sure it isn't in the way. Then the elevator stopped. Not slowed. Not bumped. Stopped. The lights flickered once and held. The box gave a hard little shudder, and everything went still. For about 2 seconds neither of us said anything. Then Natalie hit the open door button twice, like the elevator might respond to status. It didn't. She pressed the alarm. Perfect. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge under it. I set the coffees down on the floor and hit the emergency call button. Nothing at first. Then static. Then a bored voice saying building maintenance was aware of a power issue and someone would update us shortly. That's not an update, Natalie said sharply. The line crackled and died. She exhaled through her nose and looked up once, like she was calculating how angry she was allowed to be. It was obvious she hated enclosed spaces. Not in a dramatic way. In a tight-jawed, too-still way that made it worse. I kept my voice even. We've got air. Lights are on. If it was a serious drop, we'd know. It's probably between floors with a control failure. She looked at me for the first time like I was an actual person. You sound very sure. I'm trying to be useful. That almost got a smile. Almost. A few minutes turned into 15. Then 20. Building response stayed bad. Someone from security finally answered, sounded confused, promised the fire team was checking systems. Natalie loosened her grip on her phone, tightened it again, paced one step and back because there wasn't room for more than that. So I gave her practical things. Had her sit for a minute. Got her talking, not personally, just enough to keep her focused. Asked what meeting she was headed to. Quarterly review with a client team from Chicago. Materials already distributed, but the deck still had to be walked live. As she talked, I noticed she knew every number in that presentation cold. Not notes. Not broad ideas. Every number. At one point she went quiet and pressed her fingers to the wall. I don't do well with this. I know. Her eyes cut to me. Do you? Yeah. My little sister got stuck in one when she was 13. After that she wouldn't even use escalators for a month. People get in their own head fast. That made her breathe differently. Slower. So what do I do? She asked. I held her gaze. Nothing dramatic. Just stay here with me and let them get us out. It took 53 minutes total. Long enough for annoyance to turn into something real, then settle again. When the doors finally forced open a foot below the next floor, building staff were standing there acting like they deserved medals. I climbed out first, turned, and offered her my hand. She looked at it for one beat, then took it. By noon I figured that would be the end of it. Strange morning, good story for nobody, back to spreadsheets. Then the client review blew up. The latest presentation file had the wrong forecasting tab linked into 2 key slides. Numbers were off. Not small off. Bad enough that if Chicago noticed before a correction, somebody high up was getting buried. People started doing what they always do in corporate panic, talking louder, blaming faster, helping less. I was in the adjacent conference room reformatting backup notes when I heard Natalie's voice through the glass. Calm, cold, dangerous. I checked the shared drive, found the version mismatch, traced it to an autosave draft, rebuilt the broken links, flagged the corrected pages, printed clean copies, and walked them straight into the room before anybody asked. Natalie looked at the packet, then at me. How long until the live file is fixed? 3 minutes for the deck. 6 if you want the appendix checked too. Do both. I did. Then I stayed by the wall while the meeting restarted. Halfway through, one of the client people asked where a revised margin assumption came from. Natalie didn't even glance at her director. She looked at me. And because I already knew the answer, I gave it. Clean. Brief. Exact. The room shifted after that. Tiny thing, but I felt it. Like I'd been wallpaper all year and suddenly somebody had turned the lights on to me. In this building, being invisible is easy, being seen is a choice. When did you finally stand out? After the meeting ended, people filed out fast, relieved to be alive. I was packing my laptop when Natalie stopped beside the table. Will Tanner, right? I nodded. She studied me for a second, not warmly, just directly. You kept 2 bad situations from becoming expensive today. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said, just handled what was in front of me. Her mouth moved like she approved of that answer more than she planned to. Come to my office at 6, she said. I want you on something else. Then she walked off, and for the first time since I'd joined the company, I had the feeling that being noticed might be a bigger problem than being ignored. At 6 o'clock I went to Natalie's office thinking she was going to hand me a cleanup job and forget about me again by the next week. That was the first thing I got wrong. Her office sat in the corner of the executive floor with glass on 2 sides and the kind of view that made the city look like a model someone had paid too much for. She was at the table instead of behind the desk, jacket off, sleeves neat, reading through a set of draft materials with a pen in her hand. You're on time, she said. I figured that was the safest move. That got me a brief look over the top of the page. Sit down. She was preparing for a board strategy review, and the deck she'd been given was a mess. Too many words, weak order, numbers buried in the wrong places. She didn't explain any of that like I needed a lesson. She just slid the packet toward me and asked, "What would you cut first?" I read it for maybe 40 seconds and told her. Then she asked what I would move, what I thought the room would push back on, which page would make the CFO interrupt, where the weak handoff was between operations and finance. It stopped feeling like a task and started feeling like an audition I hadn't known I was in. By 8:30 I was still there, laptop open, rebuilding slides while she paced and dictated changes in short clean lines. She was fast. Faster than anyone I'd worked with. No wasted words. No fake praise. When I got something right, she moved on like that was the baseline she expected. Around 9, someone from catering dropped off dinner she clearly hadn't had time to touch. Natalie looked at the bag, then at me. Eat, she said. I'm fine. That wasn't a group discussion, Will. So we ate at the end of the conference table while the city went dark outside the glass. It should have felt stiff. It didn't. Not exactly. There was still pressure in the room, but it had changed shape. Less boss and employee. More like I'd been allowed through a door I wasn't supposed to know existed. She asked where I was from. I told her. Small town, state school, first person in my family to work in a place where people used phrases like value chain with a straight face. And yet, she said, opening her water, you don't act impressed by titles. I'm impressed by useful people. That made her stop with the bottle halfway to her mouth. Careful, she said. That almost sounded like confidence. Maybe the elevator knocked something loose. She laughed once. Real laugh. Quick, low, gone just as fast. But I heard it. After that night, she started using me more. At first it all had clean explanations. She needed a second set of eyes on materials before a client pitch. She wanted briefing notes cut down before a morning call. She needed someone to stay late and rebuild a schedule after two senior managers spent an afternoon protecting their own egos instead of doing their jobs. The strange part was not that she kept choosing me. It was how specific she got. She didn't ask a team lead for support and get stuck with me. She contacted me directly. Sometimes by email. Then text. Then short calls from the back of a car where all I could hear was traffic and her saying, "Open your laptop. I'm forwarding something now." My days started bending around her pace. My nights too. And once that happened, other people noticed before I was ready for them to. A director who used to call me Buddy suddenly started using my full name in meetings. One manager asked why I was copied on material above my level. Another stopped talking when I walked into the break room and didn't restart until I left. Nobody said anything plain, not yet, but I could feel the air changing. One Thursday night, after a brutal review session that ended with Natalie shutting down two vice presidents in under 3 minutes, she came out of the conference room, looked at me still standing there with my notes, and said, "Are you heading home?" "Eventually. Come with me first." It wasn't framed like an invitation. It was framed like the next item on an agenda. Her driver took us downtown to a restaurant I never would have picked for myself because I wouldn't have known how to act inside it. Low light. Quiet tables. Staff who seemed to recognize her without making a show of it. "This still work?" I asked when we sat down. It started that way. That answer sat between us for a second. Dinner should have been all business, but it kept slipping sideways. She asked what I wanted from the company. Not the polite answer. The real one. I told her I was tired of being the guy people trusted in private and overlooked in public. She watched me for a long moment. That can change. The way she said it did something to me. Not because it sounded like a promise. Because it sounded like a decision she was already halfway to making. When dinner ended, rain was hitting the street hard enough to blur the lights. The driver was 10 minutes out. We stood under the awning while traffic moved past in long silver lines. Natalie had one hand around her phone, the other tucked at her side, and for the first time since I'd known her she looked tired instead of controlled. "Do you know why I keep pulling you in?" she asked. I should have played safe. I didn't. Because I make your life easier. That's part of it. She turned toward me then, close enough that I caught the clean expensive scent of her coat and the heat from her skin in the cold air. "The other part," she said, "is that you never reach for more than what's in front of you. That's rare." My throat went dry. Is that a compliment? It depends what you do with it. The car still wasn't there. Neither of us stepped back. When she touched my tie, just 2 fingers near the knot like she was fixing something small, I forgot half the things I knew about self-preservation. Her hand stayed there a second too long. My hand found her wrist before I had time to think better of it. She looked at me, steady as ever, but there was something open in her face I hadn't seen before. "Will," she said quietly. That should have been the warning. Instead it felt like permission. I kissed her under the awning with rain hitting the street a few feet away and the whole city moving past like it had nothing to do with us. She kissed me back instantly, like this had been waiting on both sides for longer than either of us wanted to admit. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Direct. Decisive. The way she did everything. When the driver pulled up, we broke apart and got into the back seat without saying much. She gave her home address. That was the moment I knew I was already too deep to call any of it casual. After that night, Natalie didn't turn strange or distant. That would have been easier. Instead, she got even more certain. On Monday morning, I was moved into a temporary support role for her division. That was the official line. In practice, it meant I stopped doing half the small junk that used to eat my week and started sitting in rooms where people twice my level suddenly had to hear my opinion before a deck went out. Natalie didn't announce any of it with some dramatic speech. She just started using me in front of the right people, and once she did that, nobody wanted to be the first one to question it to her face. The first time it really landed for me was during a strategy meeting with senior operations and finance. A director named Greg cut across me halfway through a recommendation and said, "I think we have enough senior voices on this already." I was about to back off when Natalie set her pen down. "No," she said. "We don't. Let him finish." The whole table went quiet. Not loud quiet. Office quiet. The kind where everyone keeps their face still because they know the actual meeting just changed. Greg leaned back like he hadn't meant anything by it. I finished my point, Natalie backed it, and 10 minutes later the room was working off my structure. That was new. So was the travel. A few weeks later she took me to Boston for 2 days with an account team that normally would never have noticed I existed. Officially I was there for prep and follow-through. In reality, I was everywhere she needed me. In the car from the airport, in the lobby before the dinner, in the side room before the morning session, tightening the message, trimming dead language, fixing order, catching the thing nobody senior had bothered to catch because they were too busy performing confidence. Natalie liked having me close. I could tell. Not just at night. In motion. In work. In those sealed little spaces between one high-level thing and the next, where she could drop the public version of herself for 3 minutes and just say exactly what she was thinking. One evening after meetings, a box was waiting for me at the hotel desk. No card. Inside was a dark charcoal suit that fit like it had been measured off me in secret. Better than anything I'd ever owned. I stared at it for a full minute before I texted her. "This is a problem." Her reply came back right away. "Wear it tomorrow." That was Natalie. No explanation. No apology. Just a decision with my size already built into it. I wore it. The next morning I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked richer. Because I looked like somebody the room might actually listen to before dismissing. And people did. That was the dangerous part. It worked. Back at the office, the whispers got louder. I didn't hear them directly at first. I heard the edited versions. Sudden silence when I walked into the kitchen. A joke cut short near the printers. A manager from legal asking, too casually, why I seem to be in every sensitive prep chain now. One woman from procurement smiled at me in the hall and said, "Must be nice," in a tone that meant the opposite. Then it got less subtle. Greg cornered me after a meeting and said, "You're moving pretty fast for somebody who was formatting notes 6 months ago." I said, "Maybe I was better at it than you thought." His smile flattened. "Maybe somebody likes having you around." That hit exactly where he wanted it to. Before I could answer, Natalie stepped out of the conference room behind us. She took one look at his face, one look at mine, and that was enough. "Greg," she said, "walk with me." He did. By the end of the week, 2 of his projects had been reassigned and he was no longer in the review chain for anything tied directly to Natalie's division. Nobody needed it explained. The lesson moved through the floor on its own. That was when I understood the full shape of what was happening. She wasn't just making time for me. She wasn't just pulling me into some private arrangement after office hours and leaving me to survive the rest alone. She was changing the ground under my feet. Clearing space. Removing friction. Taking people who treated me like background and forcing them to recalculate. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it anywhere. The new assignments. The meetings added to my calendar without me asking. The moments when Natalie would turn to me before anyone else in the room. The fact that senior people had started watching me carefully, not because I was easy to overlook anymore, but because I wasn't. One night, after everybody else had gone, I was in her office reviewing numbers for a quarterly package when she came around the desk and stood beside me. "You've stopped looking surprised," she said. "I'm still surprised." "No," she said quietly. "Now you're adapting." She rested one hand on the back of my chair, close enough that I could feel the shift in the room again, that private charge that had started taking over every space we shared. I looked up at her. "Did you plan this?" Her expression barely changed. I noticed what was already there. That answer stayed with me. Because by then I knew two things at once, and both were true. I wanted her more every week. And my whole life was changing because she'd decided I was worth moving. By the time the year started turning, I wasn't the guy people asked to stay behind and clean up notes anymore. I was the guy they looked for when a room got tense. Natalie had moved me into a real role by then. Not some temporary support label people could laugh off. I had a title that actually meant something, a calendar full of meetings that used to happen 3 floors above my pay grade, and a seat at the table often enough that nobody could pretend I was there by accident. I dressed differently because I had to. Spoke differently because I'd learned that in certain rooms, if you leave space, somebody more comfortable with power will fill it for you. The whispers never stopped. They just changed tone. At first it had been disbelief. Then mockery. Then suspicion. By spring it was something closer to caution. People still talked, obviously. They always would. But they talked around me now, not over me. And that was a real difference. I could feel it in elevators, in conference rooms, in the half-second pause before someone decided how respectful they needed to sound. Natalie kept pushing. She had me lead prep on a major renewal with one of the company's hardest accounts. Then she put me into a negotiation call that should have gone to a director and let me carry the middle of it when the conversation got stuck. A month later she had me present operating risk updates in front of a leadership group that had barely known my name the year before. I walked in with my pulse high and my notes tight, and by the time I walked out, 2 of those people were asking me follow-up questions like I belonged there. That night, Natalie and I sat in the back of her car while it moved through midtown traffic. "You were ready for that 6 months ago," she said. "No, I wasn't." She turned her head slightly. "You were." They weren't. That was how she saw the world. Not as fixed levels. More like doors most people never tried to force because they'd already accepted who was allowed through them. And once she decided I was one of those people, she never really slowed down. One of the last real fights came in June. A senior manager from another division tried to box me out of a deal review by sending a version of the prep materials without my name on the chain. Small move. Petty. Meant to remind me where I was supposed to be standing. I found out because Natalie forwarded the file to me with one line. "Join us anyway." So I did. I walked into the room 10 minutes after the meeting started, took the open chair near the end of the table, and set down my folder like I'd been expected all along. The manager looked annoyed enough to show it, which was his mistake. Halfway through the review he tried to dismiss one of my recommendations without reading the addendum. Natalie asked him if he'd reviewed the appendix at all. He admitted he hadn't. She looked at him for a second and said, "Then maybe stop talking until you have." Nobody said much after that. 3 weeks later he was reassigned to a less visible portfolio. I would love to say that by then I felt clean about all of it. Like my rise was fully mine, simple, earned, easy to explain. It wasn't. I knew I was good. Better than the title I'd started with. Better than the way people had treated me when this all began. But I also knew Natalie had accelerated everything. Cleared lanes. Put weight behind my name before I could have created that weight alone. And the strangest part was that the more I understood that, the less it made me want to pull away. Because this thing between us wasn't fake. Complicated, yes. Dangerous, obviously. But not fake. Late at night, after meetings, after flights, after hotel bars and quiet dinners and long hours bent over decks and forecasts, she would finally go still with me in a way I never saw anywhere else. No performance. No executive cool. Just fatigue, sharp instincts, and that private look she only gave me when the day was over and nobody else was left. I stopped trying to separate what she wanted from what she believed. By then it was the same thing. The final turn came in August. A major agreement the company had been chasing for months was finally close. Not done, but close enough that the last meeting mattered. Real money. Real exposure. The kind of account that changed who got taken seriously for the next 2 years. Natalie was supposed to be there in person, but a board issue pinned her in New York the day before travel. She called me into her office at 7:30 that night. No assistant. No audience. Just her, the lights low, a stack of binders on the table, and the city throwing reflections against the glass. "You're going in my place," she said. I honestly thought I'd heard her wrong. For the prep? For the meeting? I looked at her. "Natalie. You know the account. You know the pressure points. You know where they're bluffing and where they're serious. That's not the point." She stood, came around the desk, and stopped right in front of me. "It is exactly the point," she said. "They trust competence. You have it. Stop arguing from the version of yourself that no longer exists." That hit me harder than it should have. Maybe because I still had that old version of me sitting somewhere in the back of my head. The one carrying coffee into an elevator, hoping nobody important noticed him unless they needed something fixed. She handed me the top folder. "Car leaves for the airport at 5:30. Legal has the updated language. Finance signed off an hour ago. I want the revised terms confirmed before wheels up, and I want a call the second you're out of the room tomorrow." I took the folder. Then she reached up, straightened my tie the same way she had that first rainy night, and said, "Quieter now, go make them see what I saw." The next morning I was in the back of a black car with 2 phones, 1 garment bag, 3 marked-up binders, and a view of the city sliding by in gray-blue light. I had a boarding pass in my pocket with executive travel on it, my inbox full of messages from people who suddenly needed quick answers from me, and a name on the meeting schedule that would have sounded impossible a year earlier. I looked down at the folder on my lap, then at my reflection in the window. A year ago I was a low-level employee nobody really saw. Now I was on my way to close something that mattered.